Parents sold our house when I turned 18, leaving me homeless so they could travel. 5 years later, my mom shows up crying because dad cheated. I laughed in her face and shut the door. I'm 23, and I lost my home and was cut off by my parents when I turned 18, almost 5 years ago. Right from my childhood, I had a very troubled relationship with my parents. I could tell I was not someone who was wanted. Whenever I was little, I tried to get them to love me and earn their affection, but when I realized it was pointless, I stopped trying and started minding my own business instead. I think that change started around middle school or high school. By the time I was in high school, I would only speak to my parents when I needed something and wouldn't bother them otherwise. It wasn't that I didn't want a relationship with them. It was just that they had made it so obvious to me that they didn't want a relationship with me that I felt bad even trying to bother them when I needed something, even though I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else and only had them. My dad was a pediatrician and my mom used to teach science in middle school, so they were both pretty good with kids. It's pretty ironic how they were great with other people's children, but not so much with their own. Anyway, by high school, I decided not to bother trying to win them over. We led very separate lives, and I would barely even see them. My dad would come home late, and even though my mom came home around the same time I did, we wouldn't talk to each other. We didn't even acknowledge each other, and just stayed in our own rooms. I'm not even kidding, it was like living with strangers. We had the absolute bare minimum of interactions, and that was it. I also knew that for college, I would have to find my own way because on my 18th birthday, they made it very clear to me that so far, they had been there for me because it was legally necessary. But now that I was no longer a minor, I had to start making my own way in life. They made it sound like they were encouraging me to be independent, but I knew what it really was about. They just wanted me to stop depending on them. They couldn't care less about whether I was independent or not. I hadn't applied to any colleges at that point because I had decided to take a gap year to try to build some capital. I knew I would need money to survive, and until I had that, I couldn't even dream of going to college. So after I turned 18, I started looking for jobs, and soon enough, I began working at a local supermarket. I didn't get paid much, but it felt nice to finally earn something for myself. Unfortunately, my happiness was short-lived. Just a couple of weeks after I got that job, I had a new set of worries to think about. Shortly after I started working, my parents announced they were selling the house and I needed to start looking for a place to live. I had no idea what was going on the day they told me, and when I asked them why they were selling the house, they told me that they planned to quit their jobs and travel around the country with the money they made. Apparently, they had been saving for something like this their entire lives, and now, since I had a job and was old enough to live on my own, they had no responsibilities to worry about. They were doing what they had planned, and they were giving me a heads up, so I could sort out my life accordingly. This put me in a really difficult situation because I had just started working and I didn't have enough money set aside to rent an apartment. No, not even if I had roommates to split the costs. I had barely started saving money, and at the rate things were going, even if I lived on the streets, I still wouldn't have enough money to start college the next year, like I had planned. And now my parents had dropped this bomb on me. I would be homeless unless I got a place of my own. I tried to talk it out with them and ask them not to sell the house, or at least put their plans on hold for a few months, so I could have enough time to prepare and move out, but they were very stubborn and didn't care about what I was going through. They told me they had waited long enough and weren't putting off their plans anymore. What I was going to do was my problem, not theirs. My mother told me, "You are an adult now, and we don't need to take responsibility for what you do anymore. As for the house, it's our property, and we can do whatever we want with it. Where you live is not our concern anymore." These were her exact words, and I still remember them because they were so incredibly hurtful and frustrating. That day, I ended up getting into a huge fight with my parents, and after that, I didn't see them again. Nor did I hear from them, which wasn't surprising, since I had known they would never try to get back in touch with me once I left. I told them they were terrible people and hoped that only terrible things happened to them since they totally deserved it. I cursed them out, not even caring that they were my parents and much older than me. I just didn't care anymore since they were screwing me over, without caring about what would happen to me. The problem was, even though I had left the house in a huff, I realized afterward that I had literally nowhere else to go. I didn't have any family members willing to take me in. My parents hadn't exactly kept in touch with their families. Both my parents lived away from their respective families, and since they never bothered to attend most family events, I didn't have a strong relationship with anybody. I barely knew anyone, so it would be foolish to expect them to take me in, and I wouldn't even be able to reach them since we lived in a different state. I did have a few friends from school, but they were all away at college at the time I left my house, and I didn't want to bother them or their parents because that would be pretty awkward. So I decided to take a leap of faith and called a coworker of mine, who is now my wife. It's a crazy string of events, but I'm glad I decided to reach out to her that day. She was in charge of the makeup department at the supermarket where I worked, and we had been flirting back and forth ever since I joined. We became pretty good friends in a really short time, and I knew she also had a lot of issues with her parents. So I knew she would understand what I was going through. She was 2 years older than me, and just like me, she hadn't been able to go to college because her dad was an addict, and her mother didn't seem to care about anyone except herself. The moment she turned 18, her father left the house and moved in with his brother. Her mother told her she couldn't support her anymore, so that was her story. Since then, she had been working so she could go to cosmetology school and become a professional makeup artist. When I called her and told her what was happening, she immediately said I could come stay with her. I was, and still am, incredibly grateful for what she did. I don't think I would have survived on my own since it was pretty cold that time of the year, and I had nobody else to help me out. Even though her apartment was small and she was getting by on her own with a lot of hard work, she chose to help me out. That speaks volumes about the kind of person she is. Anyway, she let me stay with her, and for the first few months, I didn't pay rent. I was still trying to save up money, but I contributed to groceries and other bills. Once I had saved enough, I started contributing to the rent as well. Before we knew it, we had gone from friends to people who couldn't live without each other. Initially, my plan was to work at the supermarket for about a year and a half, but after cutting ties with my parents and realizing I didn't even have a place to stay, I started working harder. I'm still working there, but in a much better position. I applied for the position of floor supervisor, and thankfully I got the job because I had been one of the most sincere and dedicated employees. That's how things have been for the past year. I get paid decently, and my wife is now putting herself through cosmetology school while working part-time at the store. Things have been going well for us, and we were happy, until last week when my mother showed up unannounced. I don't know how she found me since I haven't been in touch with her for the past 5 years, but as soon as I opened the door, she gave me a giant hug before I could even prepare for what was happening. I had made the mistake of not looking through the peephole before opening the door, and once I regained my composure, I asked her why she was there. She was already putting her bags down in front of our apartment. When I asked her, she stopped, looked at me sadly, and told me she was back because my father had decided to leave her. She filled me in on what she and my dad had been doing the past few years, and, to keep it short, they traveled the country for the first year and a half, then moved to California. A month ago, my dad told her he was having an affair with a woman he met while working as a pediatrician. I thought about the situation for a minute and told her I wasn't sure I cared. She tried to make it sound like I should feel sorry for her, but honestly, I couldn't. What she had done to me was unforgivable. The last time I talked to her, she was cruel enough to kick me out of the house without giving me a chance to ask for her help. So after hearing everything, I laughed in her face and told her that if she thought I would help her after everything she and my father did, she was out of her mind. She started crying and I felt nothing. I shut the door in her face and locked it. It felt so damn good. I haven't heard from her since, but I feel so much better knowing I don't have to pretend to care about them anymore.